Hello, everybody. Welcome to the April RDLA webinar. I'm going to give everyone just a few seconds to get logged on, and then we will get started. Perfect. So we will have more people joining us as we go, but we will go ahead and get started for time's sake. So again, welcome to the April RDLA webinar. We are going to be focusing on appropriations today, and we have some really great panelists that are going to share with you all. If you prefer to call into today's webinar, you can do so using the phone number and webinar ID on the screen. If you have a question as we're going, please drop that into the Q&A box. We will have RDLA team members there to answer questions for you. And if you have questions for the speakers, we will direct the questions to each speaker once they are finished. A reminder for the media, if you are joining us today, we ask that you formally announce your participation, and we encourage you to follow up with participants after the webinar for direct quotes. We are also offering closed captioning today, so if you are interested in that, you can click the live transcript button at the bottom of your screen. And we also have Spanish translation services available. You can click the link that Shannon has posted in the chat to access that. And then here is our agenda. So we are going to get started with Clay Alspack. He is going to share a bit with you all about the president's budget. And then Sheila Murphy is going to share a bit with you about the timeline for FY 2023 appropriations. And then we are going to have some representatives from different rare disease organizations share about their organization's appropriation priorities. So you will be hearing from Dylan Simon, Sheila Murphy, Stephen Grossman, Ryan Fisher, Christina Mai, and Lisa Tobin. And then lastly, we will have Rachel, our state advocacy fellow, share a little bit with you about upcoming state advocacy events. So make sure you stay until the end. You'll want to hear about these. They're very exciting. And Clay, I will pass it over to you.
Well, thank you so much for the opportunity to be here today. On the next slide, we can kind of get kicked in there. We're going to be talking about the fiscal year 2023, the president's budget. It is a topic that it can get very weedy very quickly, so I'll try to stay high level, but it's one that is very important. What I'll do, and don't worry, I'm not going to talk forever. This agenda hopefully will help with just understand kind of where I'm going as I meander and provide these thoughts over the next 10 minutes. But basically what we'll do is I'll give you some quick background on the president's budget and then some key takeaways. It's a big document, a lot of money. The federal government spends a tremendous amount of money, as you all know. Provide some key takeaways on that. And then we'll get into some of the key health policies that you'll see in this. That is, as I'll explain, the budget won't be adopted by Congress, but it includes so much important information for us as we better understand where the president's priorities are and what may end up in the appropriations or the government funding or other vehicles. So it's important. And then to the extent time allows, I'll get more into FDA and NIH. But we can go to the next slide, please. So as I mentioned, the president's budget, it just recently came out. It feels like it was a few months ago, but it was actually just the end of last month. So it's only a few weeks. It came out on March 28th. And what it is it submitted a formal budget request for fiscal year 2023. Fiscal year 2023 actually starts on October 1st of 2022. As you all know, the federal government works on a different calendar than the regular calendar. And so it's important, it's coming sooner rather than later. But what it is, the president's budget is a set of recommendations that comes to Congress basically on a couple of sets of spending. One is on the discretionary spending. That's what you see through the appropriations vehicles. That'll be the next part of our webinar that we'll walk through. It also includes mandatory changes. This is spending that basically comes forward or comes through other legislation. This is Medicare and Medicaid or some other programs too. there's actually a significant amount of mandatory spending that you would think would be discretionary that's included as part of President Biden's budget. Under the president's budget, usually comes out in February. This one was a little later. That's not that's not uncommon, and there's no like penalty for that. It just means that the other part of the budget process starts a little later. But let's go to the next slide. I can walk through just some of the context and key takeaways. Why everybody is on the edge of their seats or around the president's budget is it really kickstarts the budget process for Congress. That when the document comes forward, there's scrubbing of it by stakeholders, but as well as members of Congress, the appropriations committees, the authorizing committees, and it really starts that process. What it'll do is, in addition to just starting that, it also kickstarts a whole set of hearings that what you're seeing in front of the appropriations committee as well as the authorizing committees, where cabinet secretaries as well as agency heads will come forward and provide additional details on the president's budget, as well as answer questions from senators and members of the House on topics that they really care about. That's the season we're in right now. Next week, you'll see Secretary Becerra as an example in front of Energy and Commerce Committee. You'll see FDA Commissioner Califf in front of the Ag Appropriations Subcommittee. So it's a really important timing. From the budget side, and like why it's really important, not only for just to understand, for the kickstart the process, is that it really helps us better understand where the president's priorities are. The president's priorities are obviously so key to everything that we're looking forward in healthcare policy, because one is he has, of course, the administrative power that he could utilize to move forward where his priorities are. He also will engage with Congress around whether it's changes in statute or the appropriations process. This document provides all the insights we need to understand and to better understand where his capital will be deployed. I'll give you an example in a minute about ARPA-H. And when we saw ARPA-H, when the president's talking about it in front of the joint session last year, he's talking about it in the State of the Union this year when he's including his budget request. That means it's going to be, in our view, it's a really high likelihood it's going to be funded and move forward. That's what we get out of that request. And just a couple other pieces to mention here before we get into the specific policy is that he did call for a budget reduction as spending reductions as part of this. That's a key, I think, probably to Senator Manchin and others was an interesting inclusion here. It did include specific proposals for that, though. And that's what's really key here is that on specific proposals where he's going to be spending money or not spending money, it really helps us better understand as a healthcare community where to engage and how to help him, or where we need to engage to help kind of refocus in order for the policies to end up where it should. And then finally, while this is gonna not pass, it does, as I mentioned earlier, it's gonna be a dominant topic because of the hearings, as well as just knowing where his priorities may lie as Congress considered next steps on Build Back Better or on other spending. On the next slide, we can get into more of his specific healthcare priorities. One is mental health. Mental health, it is such a huge bipartisan priority right now, and President Biden is really showing his commitment to it and leadership on it in this budget proposal. This is something where you could expect Congress to step forward. They've had a number of hearings, but I think legislation may move forward soon. His mental health priorities will be a major factor as Congress contemplates that. Pandemic preparedness, COVID was such a big part of President Biden's campaign, and it has been a huge priority, if not the number one priority, frankly, as he's moved forward his presidency. It's a big component of the budget that he's put forward. Public health has been stressed like no other time no other time. And he has made significant commitments to public health in his budget document. And so that is including mandatory spending, as I mentioned before. Biomedical innovation has been another big topic for him, the cancer moonshot and others. And so that's a big part. And then health equity. Health equity has pervaded a policy across the board in the health space for him. It's a huge priority. You're seeing commitments from a funding standpoint in this budget document. And then finally, childcare. We all can testify as to how important childcare is. There's a significant amount, over $20 billion for that. And then on the next slide, I'll walk through and make close with this, is just related to his unity agenda and some of the key health initiatives. This new unity agenda was actually called out in the State of the Union this year, and there was a substantial amount of information provided by the administration, both within the address as well as outside of it, on topics that are really important to him. Mental health was a key component of that. ARPA-H, as I mentioned before, ARPA-H has been, since the inception of his presidency, President Biden has been speaking about ARPA-H. It actually got $1 billion in the omnibus that just passed a few weeks ago by Congress. He's continued that commitment. ARPA-H has been an area where the rare community has been looking as a possibility to try to bring additional funds to help find treatments for all of those the thousands of diseases that need it. And so that will be an area for the President Biden has continued his commitment. And then the Cancer Moonshot, highlight the Cancer Moonshot in that he's relaunching this. You all would remember when he was Vice President Biden, was substantial commitment to cancer. And you saw that through the Obama administration moving forward significant agenda items, as well as engaging Congress in 21st century cures. And so there are specific call outs for rare cancers as part of the budget document in the Cancer Moonshot section. And then I mentioned before opioids, opioids is a significant area for all of Congress, and it's huge for President Biden. He's made specific call outs as part of his unity agenda where he wants to make additional, and he believes the country needs to take additional steps. So hopefully that's a good overview for you for the budget document. Again, it's really critical, not only in the context of Congress and the appropriations process, but even larger, when you see the president moving forward, whether it's the Medicare rules, payment rules, to steps in Medicaid, to what he's looking to do as he looks at CDC, to FDA items. This budget document provides insights for us on where his priorities are. And so hopefully that provides a good overview for all of us as we kind of do a deeper dive into the appropriations process and other areas of rare priorities. So thanks for the opportunity. I'll just skip over these slides for the sake of time. So thank you so much.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Clay. Sheila, I'm going to pass things over to you.
Okay, thank you very much. And thank you, Clay. That was a really good sort of beginning of the appropriations process. I am very happy to talk about the appropriations process. I worked on the Hill for about 25 years, and many of the members I worked for were on either budget or appropriations. So it's just kind of been my bread and butter over the years. And as Clay mentioned, the president submitted his budget to Congress, and then Congress takes it from there. And the administration will be involved in kind of high-level negotiations down the road, most likely, but at this point, the ball is in Congress's court. I'm going to talk about the way the budget process is supposed to unfold according to the law, but then I will also annotate that with discussion of what usually happens, because the two things are, as you know, quite different. The first step Congress takes when they get the president's budget is to begin the hearing process, as Clay talked about, and then they begin the process of putting together a budget resolution. And the House and Senate budget committees are charged with that. And the budget resolution is, in theory, a very good idea. It's intended to set out an overall perspective on the budget, on revenue and expenditures, on expenditures on both the discretionary and mandatory side of things. And as Clay mentioned, discretionary spending refers to funding that is appropriated every year by the appropriations committees. It's generally the funding that keeps the government going and funds many of the programs. Mandatory spending is also called entitlement spending. often, and it refers to spending that happens automatically. It doesn't need to be appropriated every year. It can be changed by the authorizing committees. They can, pass legislation that changes it, but it's, when it tends to be programs like Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, federal retirement, military retirement, those sorts of programs. So anyway, the budget resolution is, in theory, supposed to set out an overall budget blueprint for the government. But what often happens is the budget resolution process gets bogged down, and the appropriations committees on both the House and Senate side, the leadership, and then the congressional leadership often work out what's called the 302A allocation, which is the overall allocation to the appropriations committees for the level of discretionary spending. And it's kind of it's sort of evolved as a workaround for the fact that the budget resolution process often gets bogged down. So once they come to agreement on a 302A allocation, then the House and Senate Appropriations Committees divvy that up among the 12 subcommittees, and those are referred to as the 302B allocations. And once they have those allocations, then they can start marking up. The House generally goes first. Usually the House ends up marking up, the House Appropriations Subcommittees end up marking up all of their bills before September. In the Senate, the process is often much slower for a whole variety of institutional and political reasons that I'd be happy to talk about in more detail. But what often happens is at the end of the fiscal year, which, as Clay mentioned, the new fiscal year, so the fiscal year FY23 will start October 1st, 2022. Because the appropriations process is often delayed, Congress will pass what's called a continuing resolution that will fund the government so it doesn't shut down until they're able to work out an overall agreement on overall appropriations. And that's referred to often as the omnibus. And in recent years, the omnibus has, included all 12 appropriations bills. In sort of, I would say, in the 10 to 12 years ago range, oftentimes they would complete action on a couple of bills. Oftentimes the DoD bill is often a high priority, but in recent years, it's pretty much the omnibus has included all of the 12 appropriations bills. I am going to talk about some specific terms that you might hear thrown around. And I'm also going to talk about opportunities for advocates to weigh in at different points in the process. One term that I think you will hear mentioned is member requests, and that is members of the appropriations committees and then kind of the general rank and file in the House and Senate. And they will, there's deadlines for offices to submit their requests to relevant subcommittees. In kind of a general tier of recommendations, member requests for members of the appropriations subcommittee tend to have higher priority. The full committee is kind of second priority, and then kind of general rank and file members is third priority, which is not to say that they're not priorities. It's just, there's sort of a general ranking depending on committee assignments. Then there's also outside group requests, which is what we all are working on right now, submitting our recommendations on and working through coalitions to advocate for NIH funding, CDC funding, kind of all the really important health programs that we all work on. Then there are earmarks, which have resurfaced in the past year. Earmarks are legislative language that directs an agency to spend money in a certain way. And they were traditionally a really important part of kind of keeping the wheels moving on the appropriations process. But there were definitely some excesses, which I don't know if all of you ever watched Jon Stewart on The Daily Show. He really highlighted some of the excesses. And then earmarks were not included in appropriations bills for several years, but in the past year have made an reappearance. Then there's also something called report language, which is, it's not binding, but it's suggestive of Congress's intent, and it's language that is included in either the House or Senate in the reports that accompany the appropriations bills. From the standpoint of, I think probably most of the folks on this call, the high priority appropriations bills, the first one is labor HHS education appropriations, and it includes funding for NIH, CDC, AHRQ, HHS, SPARTA, all those agencies. Then there's the agriculture appropriations bill, which includes funding for the FDA. And then the defense bill includes funding for peer review medical programs, which is another opportunity to seek federal funding. And in terms of opportunities to weigh in, the opportunities actually begin when the budget is still in the administration's hands, whether that's weighing in with OMB or some of the executive branch agencies on your priorities. And then once the budget is submitted to Congress, there are opportunities to submit testimony, weigh in with subcommittee clerks, engage constituents to work on behalf of an issue that you're advocating for. And the same basic process goes on at the full committee as well. And then, for us as advocates, I think most of us tend to work in coalitions, which is a way to kind of, enhance your role in the process, or be able to have more influence in the process by working with like-minded advocates. So I'm happy to discuss any of this in more detail. It's a little tedious, but I hope this has been helpful, and happy to take any questions at any point. Thank you.
That was super helpful. Thank you so much. We don't have any questions right now, but I'll keep an eye out for any as they come in. So Dylan, I'm going to go ahead and turn things over to you.
Great, thanks so much. So again, my name is Dylan Simon. I'm the Director of Policy here at the Life Foundation for Rare Diseases. I'm going to walk you through our appropriations request. I think beforehand, I think it's also important to know that each organization goes through their own process, and not everybody can ask for everything. Everyone kind of has to prioritize and sort of where their best ask can be. And so us as a foundation have gone through that process starting end of last year and early into this year, and we've landed on these asks that I'm about to walk through. So next slide, please. And so this year, the Life Foundation for the FY23 has 3 appropriations requests. And it's spread out kind of across the healthcare landscape. So one was at the FDA, one is at NCATs within the NIH, and one is more broad, and it will address various agencies, but under the topic of newborn screening. Next slide, please. So some background on the FDA Office of Orphan Product Development. So this office sits within the FDA, and it helps to promote the development of therapies for rare disease patients through its management of 2 grant programs. The first is the Orphan Product Clinical Trials Grant Program, and this helps to support research projects that test the safety and efficacy of new treatments through clinical trials. Everyone is well aware of the importance of clinical trials, and this is an important grant program that really helps to fund specifically rare disease and other vulnerable populations in their clinical trials to ensure the fact that there is the funding available to conduct these important trials. And secondly, it helps to fund the Natural History Grants Program. This is, again, an important aspect within the rare disease community, which is characterizing the natural history of rare diseases to help to validate clinical outcome measures. So again, within rare disease clinical trials, having these clinical outcome measurements are important in the design of clinical trials. So at the end of the day, these 2 grant programs at their core are really working to help provide funding that will aid in the development of clinical trials as well as the running of clinical trials, both of which are drastically important to the rare disease community, with 93–95% of rare diseases not having access to a current therapy. And so these are 2 really big important areas to us. And so with that, if you go to the next slide, I can show us the request that we have put in is a twofold request. The first is for funding language to provide $30 million to this orphan products grant program to reflect its fully authorized funding level. In addition, we also request report language. So this is a great way to kind of guide the FDA and what we hope them to do with that funding. And again, it really kind of discusses what I highlighted before on the previous slide and the importance of it. So really hoping that this $30 million goes to this grant program and then helps develop products to help treat rare diseases. Next slide, please. So the second would be NCATs, or the National Center for Advancing Translational Science. So NCATs is an agency that sits within the NIH, and it helps to fund a variety of rare disease research aimed to improve both diagnosis and therapeutic development. This includes the Rare Disease Clinical Research Network, as well as therapeutics for rare and neglected disease. NCATs plays a major role within rare disease research. It's important to note that rare disease research occurs throughout the NIH, and it can vary based on which institute you're looking at, and often institutes are based off of whether it's autoimmune or the Heart, Lung, and Blood Institute. Like it can vary how they organize it. And so rare disease research does occur throughout the NIH. So I think it's important to note because there are some who will do a broad NIH ask, which we love to see. But there is definitely a lot of NCATs research that occurs, or a lot of rare disease research that occurs at the NCAT specifically. And so us at the WLI Foundation, we try to keep some of our requests a little more focused. And so that's why we focus this year on NCAT specifically. And so next slide, please. And so we requested back one. Thank you. A funding request for NCATs. And so that is an increase that is in line with the percent increase that the community is asking for the broad NIH. Again, in line with that 5% increase to the overall NIH budget, but specific to NCATs. And then in addition, because the request is for the entire institute, we also want to include this report language you can see here in terms of ensuring the fact that part of that funding, part of all that, the funding that requested for NCATs will go to rare disease research. So including that report language within the FY23 appropriations to highlight the importance of the rare disease research that NCATs does and ensure that funding continues to flow that way and continue to be implemented for rare disease research within NCATs. Next slide, please. And lastly is newborn screening. And so just obviously a very high level, I know many on this call work on newborn screening, but newborn screening is a successful public health program that aims to provide an early diagnosis, which leads to life-saving treatment for newborns within 24 to 48 hours after birth. And within the federal government, there are various ways that the government can support that. And so it really comes down to three main programs. So within the CDC, it is the Newborn Screening Quality Assurance Program, which works with state labs to perform quality testing, implement newborn screening, as well as work with partners to develop new screening tests for specific disorders. And so the CDC is definitely more on the testing side, the lab testing side of the newborn screening effort. Whereas HRSA's Herald Disorders Program really works to assist states' expansion of the newborn screening programs through parent and provider education. And so newborn screening, as we often like to say, is more than a test, it is a program. And within that program, you have various educational resources to ensure the fact that not only parents are properly educated when they receive the diagnosis, but that physicians and nurses and genetic counselors are probably educated on these conditions as well. So when they're speaking to these patients and these families, they know more about these rare diseases. It's also important to know that HRSA also supports the work of the Advisory Committee on Hereditary Disorders and Newborn Children, which is the federal advisory committee that oversees the recommended uniform screening panel, which is the recommended newborn screening panel that most states follow. And lastly, the Hunter Kelly Newborn Screening Research Program at the NIH helps to fund research that improves multiple aspects of the newborn screening process. So again, this is another avenue to help fund rare disease research and really ensure the fact that there are improvements being made every day within that space and within rare diseases. So next slide, please. So I think it's first important to note that the first request would be a $10 million increase for both the newborn screening programs at the CDC and HRSA. And within that, we also asked for a $50 million to the CDC for timely implementation of newborn screening conditions with the goal of complete RUS implementation in all 50 states by 2025. So it's always important to know that the RUS is a recommended panel. Currently, only 17 of the 50 states screen for all 35 conditions. And so that $15 million within the largest CDC budget would help to play a role in getting the testing where it needs to be to ensure the fact that these states can begin screening. In addition, we asked for robust and predictable increases for the NIH to help support the Hunter Kelly Research Program. And lastly, it's important to note that we also included what will be a report language request, which would be a $2 million supporting HHS to commission a National Academy of Medicine study on the uniform scheming panel review and recommendation process to identify factors that impact decisions to add new conditions to the panel. So from a whole, this request is really to look at how do we modernize newborn screening. And it's important to note that this comes from the reauthorization effort that many on this call are aware has stalled out. And so this is a way to still try to get this National Academy study moving forward so we can get this information so we can still work to modernize newborn screening to ensure the fact that it remains one of the most successful public health programs. And with that, that is my time. I'm happy to answer any questions. I am checking the Q&A box and can answer them as we go.
Awesome. Yeah, Dylan, we have a very quick question for you. Do you know the timing for the FDA grants?
I do not, but that is something I can check and get back to you. I do know in general, I believe these are annual grants that can be submitted to the FDA, but in terms of when they are made available, if this is kind of an open rolling cycle or there is windows, in that sense, I'm not aware of those specific details, but I do know they are generally made available.
Gotcha. And then one more question. This person asked, are they working to expand the panels so that more people are correctly diagnosed? For cystic fibrosis, for example, there are only 60 mutations on the panel tested. These are more common. There are about 2,000 mutations, which means that people of color are underdiagnosed.
So that expansion piece that you're seeing, that $15 million, would not cover that. With that being said, I think there are other aspects within this request that would help that. First, to help the issues today, because we are aware that this is an important issue and one that we have focused on here at the foundation. The $10 million increase at the CDC can help to improve those panels to ensure the fact that they are screening for more than those mutations, and how do we better ensure the fact that we are covering a broader aspect of those variants that lead to cystic fibrosis in a broad community. In addition, the National Academy study would work to review questions just like that. How do we ensure the fact that we are not losing people through newborn screening just because we weren't screening for their specific genetic variant that leads to their cystic fibrosis? And so I think that's, while not directly within that $15 million, I think the increased funding can help address that issues in various ways.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Dylan.
No question.
Great. So Sheila, we are back to you.
Sure. I'm very happy to talk about Research America's priorities. As I think most of you know, Research America is a nonprofit generally dedicated to promoting both public and private investment in biomedical and public health research. So our priorities, I think, are maybe a little bit broader than Every Life's, but definitely I think all of us are trying to move in the same direction. And we work with a number of different coalitions throughout the health space in advocating for all of our priorities. One of the biggest issues that we're concerned about this year is the level of NIH funding. The president's budget had just a 0.6% increase in the NIH's base budget. And so we have been working with other groups advocating and initiating and signing on to letters urging that number be boosted significantly, and urging that while we do support ARPA-H, we just want to make sure that the ARPA-H funding is not supplanting NIH funding. We also have been advocating for and strongly support additional funding for the CDC. I think the whole pandemic showed how important the CDC is and how important public health is. So obviously that's something that needs additional funding. And then finally, AHRQ is something that we've advocated for over the years. And we are doing the same thing this year, working with other advocates in this space. And obviously we strongly support the Orphan Drug Act and all the things that Every Life works on as well. So I will leave it there.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Sheila. So I'm now going to pass it over to Stephen Grossman with the Alliance for a Stronger FDA.
Thank you. I'm sitting here. Sheila, you should also mention that Research America is a member of the Alliance for a Stronger FDA, and that you also have been one of the most active members
Yes.
in recognizing that it's all well and good to spend 44 billion or whatever it is on biomedical research, but much of it, if it's going to help patients get to patients, goes through FDA. And so you want to have a well-funded FDA in order to
Absolutely.
avoid a bottleneck, which used to be more severe, but still is a reality. That said, thank you, Sheila. The Alliance for a Stronger FDA has existed for about 15 years. We have 150 members. And we exclusively work on funding issues concerning FDA. We don't get involved in the policy issues, and that's because our members are consumer and patient groups, health profession societies, trade groups, industry. We have what has to be a unique distinction in that we can walk into a congressional office with a consumer advocate and a person from industry, and both of them are saying our regulatory agency needs to be better funded. So that's about the Alliance. I urge you, if indeed you see the relationship between NIH and FDA is particularly important to you, and I think it should. Let's get to the first slide. I was going to say my contact information is at the bottom. A couple of things that I can offer people here is we just came out with a short PowerPoint that's a primer on how FDA is funded. Hint, it's much more complicated than NIH. Although I'd rather have their money, don't get me wrong. And I also would be happy to invite anybody on the call who would like to join as a guest. We have a webinar next Friday with Jeff Shuren, the head of the Center for Disease Devices and Radiological Health. And on May 10th, we have a webinar with Dr. Peter Marks. Both will be talking about their budget priorities for 2023. So in terms of where the Alliance is, it's stated in that blue box. Basically, the administration requested $336 million. That's a substantial amount of money, and we are supporting that. I point out to people that you see all sorts of different numbers, and one of the reasons, there are several, and I'll get to each of them, but that the largest part of the increase is in salary and expenses, which is the number we traditionally look at. But the administration has acknowledged some severe needs in the area of FDA facilities and has added some money into the buildings and facilities portion of the budget. Altogether, it's $3.653 billion that's being asked for. And we also support the proposed no-year money requests for pandemic response and for the cancer moonshot. A key point that we make to policymakers and the media is that FDA is not a static agency, that every year through events as well as Congress, the responsibilities of the agency keep growing. And in order to fund that, the Hill particularly needs to see the growing responsibilities requires a budget that grows. It can't be static. So why not? One, rapid acceleration of science and technology, new challenges, new opportunities, artificial intelligence, blockchain, cell and gene therapy. It just goes on, and it's wonderful, but it costs money to do it right as a regulator. They need more budget, technical staff, and better analytic tools. That's something that we don't hear much about, but it's a pressing need. As you get new types of products, new product areas, new areas of science and biology, you have to stay ahead of it. And because example would be, FDA can't judge a product that's built on artificial intelligence unless it has staff itself that understand artificial intelligence and are in a position to evaluate what's being proposed. In addition, the FDA's Technology Modernization Action Plan and Data Modernization Action Plan need substantial funding. I mean, I know every agency says that they need that, and that's true, but there's some great opportunities to turn data into usable information that can improve regulatory decisions. But the systems for the largest part aren't there. CBER has 30 different systems that don't talk to each other. CEDAR has another 30 that don't talk to CBER and don't talk to each other. So there's a pressing need for that, and the payoff is going to be pretty large, but it's a fairly large investment too. So it won't, it's going to take Congress time to fund it, but we keep going back to that. Next slide. Okay, thank you. Just quickly, the administration identified 4 priorities: investing in core operations. That's the kinds of things I was talking about: technology, capacity, infrastructure. And it's important for, I would guess almost everybody on this call is focused on medical products and medical technology, but there's the same incredible growth in science that backs up food safety. For instance, whole genome sequencing is a critical step towards a safer food supply. So there's science and technology in both parts of the agency that need to be supported. Enhancing food safety, nutrition, advancing medical product safety, and then modernizing, which I've talked about. I think they're self-explanatory, but it's as well as we can do with a 400-page congressional justification. Next slide. A couple of quick points I want to make about FDA funding. Again, back to this theme that it's not a static agency, and the way we describe it is no agency is affected as much by advances in science, technology, innovation, and also social trends than the FDA. The budget authority funding, that is the taxpayer supported money, the one for pretty much every other agency, you're talking about BA funding pretty exclusively. That provides FDA with the broad, flexible means of responding to everything it needs to do. All other funding, and there's several, come with restrictions. The biggest one is this year is the user fee reauthorization. It's a 5-year cycle. And so the year in which user fees are reauthorized is what I call the year of maximal confusion about how the agency is funded and what's most important. User fees do not supplant BA funding. They come with very specific parameters as to what the money could be used for. They don't support the entire agency. To characterize $2 billion, it's which is by definition an overgeneralization, is the largest part of that money goes to add resources like more reviewers than would be covered in the BA appropriation. But the BA appropriation is $3.3 billion. It's still the primary funding mechanism, and the one that we can go to the appropriations committees every year and make this kind of case. So that's one thing about user fee. Another thing that people I know is tucked into that user fee number that you see pretty often, medical product user fees and tobacco user fees, they're both user fees, but they're not alike at all. One is an agreement between industry and FDA to put money, for instance, for more reviewers by things that mutually benefit both parties. Tobacco user fees are basically a surcharge on industry, the tobacco industry, to pay for its own regulation. They get nothing out of that money that makes them happy or makes them feel good. It's just so user fees, but very different. The headline number from OMB, and I'll close this up, said that there was a 34% increase in FDA funding, which it's an absurd accounting game that we play every year, Republican or Democratic administration. In this case, they added all the new pandemic funding to the existing base as if it were all FY23 money. So it's not 34%. It's a good, strong support for the agency from the administration, but it's not 34%. The proposed increase for BA is about 10%. And we're pleased with that. We would be delighted to get the 10% increase. So that sums up what I had to say. Again, if people are interested in how FDA is funded, we have a primer on that. If people would like to attend our upcoming events with Dr. Shuren of CDRH and Dr. Marks, we'd be delighted. Just get a hold of me and we'll take care of it. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So we do have some interest in the meetings that you mentioned, the upcoming FDA meetings. So if you could share the links for those in the chat box, that would be awesome.
Okay, well, I'll share my address and people can just let me know and I'll get them signed up.
Okay, sounds good. Thank you so much. Perfect. So next, Ryan, we are gonna move on to you.
Great, thank you so much. I'm thrilled to be here. I learned so much from these calls. So I'm going to talk about PPMD's appropriations request. We've been on the Hill for just over 2 decades advocating with Congress around appropriations, but also around broader legislation, including the PDUFAs. You may have heard me talk about the Benefit Act, but today I'm going to, of course, focus on appropriations. So you can go to the next slide. So it's important to understand for Duchenne, much of our advocacy efforts are actually anchored to one specific piece of legislation that was passed originally in 2001 called the NCATs Act. This was landmark legislation for the muscular dystrophy community. It ushered in sort of a whole new era of federal funding and focus around the muscular dystrophies. The provisions included establishing research centers of excellence around the country, funding institutions, establishing the first coordinating committee that linked the relevant agencies that touch Duchenne to meet regularly and create an action plan, and that was through the NIH. On the CDC side, it established the first surveillance and tracking program called MD-StarNet to better understand incidence and prevalence in the disease, and then also mandated the creation of care considerations for the first time because care was really variable across the country. And as you all know, in order to create those pieces to enable drug development, you needed to better standardize care and also build the tools in order to test therapies. And much of that research happens at the NIH. So there are specific appropriations linked to the CDC. When I mentioned that this bill was amended in 2014, it was reauthorized in 2008. And it is sort of the cornerstone of our advocacy efforts over the year related to the muscular dystrophies, in particular Duchenne, of course. You can go to the next slide. And I think the funding really does tell such an important story here. Prior to the MD-CARE Act, the CDC, in terms of their muscular dystrophy funding, was less than $1 million. And then over time, we've seen around a $6 million annual spend. We actually go to Congress and work to appropriate this money, ensure that there's report language that reflects our needs. And this year we're asking for an increase to 8 million, which I'll talk about in a bit. But the impact of the funding over time has been rather extraordinary as we've had those care considerations in place. And we have a better understanding of the numbers in terms of MD-StarNet tracking. There's been 45 plus publications, 1,200 patients tracked. And because of the standardization of care, we have seen an increase in lifespan of around 10 years. So it's been pretty remarkable in terms of CDC. We can go to the next slide. Another interesting program that falls outside of the MD CARE Act is through the Department of Defense for the CDMRP, the Congressionally Directed Medical Research Program. Duchenne is one of the conditions that are listed for the CDMRP. We go and advocate for funding specifically for this program. And as you can see there, the numbers tell the story as well. We were really, really grateful to work with our congressional champions, as well as a partner organization called the Foundation to Eradicate Duchenne, which really has taken the lead on this. And we partnered to increase that funding level to 10 million. And in 2022, we actually attempted to get from 10 to 12. The numbers, as you all know, recently came out. We're still at 10, but we're trying for 12 in 2023. And this program at a CDMRP has a consumer review committee, and we've seen the direct results of this funding in that we have drugs that are before the FDA or coming before the FDA in the coming months with a drug called vamorolone, which has been funded heavily by the DoD. So you can go to the next slide. So how does this work? So we have House and Senate funding letter champions. These are members of Congress we've worked with, some of which for many years, others that are new. Troy Boulderson, Representative Boulderson, is actually a newer champion for us because our former champion retired. But we work bipartisan, and these folks lead our letter. So we work with them on the specific request. It includes report language, as well as the numbers I was talking about with CDC and DoD. And they craft what's called a Dear Colleague letter. And now this is what our advocates focus on when they're on the Hill. They go to the Hill. It's all about consistent messaging, talking to your members of Congress, telling your story, and then asking for this request. And the request includes signing on to this appropriations letter. So that's sort of the way the process works. And we do it every year. We've been doing it for 2 decades, and it's been really quite impactful. So you can go to the next slide. This is just a look at what the summary of this year's request is for 2023. We met with offices virtually for the second time this year. And as you all probably are aware, FY22 was not finalized when we were actually on the Hill. So it created an interesting sort of set of instructions for our advocates, but they understood it. We have many seasoned advocates, and they were able to communicate that, if we're assuming level funding, this is what we want. If we get the increase, and if we don't, we want the increase for both CDC and DoD. And then we have specific report language related to CDC, NIH, and FDA. You can go to the next slide. So here's just a look at the summary of that language. So this is how we train our advocates to say, this is what you're going to communicate to the offices in terms of the report language and what's in the letter. The report language is a little longer when you look at the final letter, but we try to give them talking points, and we tell them to tie back to their own personal story what the report language may mean to you. So in terms of the CDC, there was a number request as well as report language. There you see the $8 million. And in the report language, which as was explained, this is sort of direction for those federal agencies around our priorities, and for us related to Duchenne, we want them to update those care considerations because we've had changes in our care paradigm. We have newly approved therapies. We also have advancements in cardiac care. We also requested a report, or members of Congress requested the report about the funding that was happening at the CDC related to Duchenne, and also an evaluation of the current care considerations. And then finally, we had a piece in the report language around electronic health records. On the NIH side, this is not a specific number appropriations request because we are not able to earmark specific money at NIH. We have seen a spend of around $600 million in Duchenne since the MD CARE Act, which has been really wonderful and has galvanized the research community. But for the report language, we focused on gene therapy and the challenges related to it. We talked about outcome measures and biomarkers. We need more sensitive outcome measures and biomarkers, which NIH does fund, and then establishing a cardiac research network. On the FDA side, we talked about the less common mutations. Most of our approved therapies are targeted in a subset of our patients, And there are others with less common mutations that are not being targeted. So we are encouraging more sort of adaptive designs and a way to get at those incentivized drug companies for those less common mutations. And then we want them to encourage them to use the accelerated approval pathway, which we know has been a big topic of discussion. And then on DoD, there was not report language associated with it. It was just that request for 12 million. We want to go from 10 million to 12 million to continue the progress that we made to date. So with that, I think that's the summary of my presentation. Happy to answer questions, or I think I provided my email as well, so I can hand it back.
Awesome, Ryan. Thank you so much. It doesn't look like we have any questions, but I will watch out for the chat box for any that may come in. And Christina, I will go ahead and turn things over to you.
All right. Thanks, Caitlin. This is a bit of a last minute ask, but everybody on this call knows exactly how powerful a diagnosis can really be. And when my son was diagnosed with a brand new genetic disorder back in 2012, that diagnosis gave us community and family planning options, a path to therapeutics, and validation that I was not just some crazy mom, and much more. Then when I was diagnosed with generalized myasthenia gravis, that power of that diagnosis became that much more evident. And it was a reminder that not all rare diseases are genetic. I took a break from advocacy for a while to be with my son during his final days. But I came out of retirement because when the undiagnosed patients and families of the UDN came up to me to help save the Undiagnosed Diseases Network, I really couldn't say no, because I remember what it's like to be undiagnosed. I remember the anguish and the isolation that I felt during Buddy's long diagnostic odyssey, and even my shorter one. I want to make the path easier for the patients and families who come after my family. And I think a lot of the people on this call probably feel the same way. It's, you know, the undiagnosed community today is really begging for your help, because most of you were probably once undiagnosed too. So with that said, the Undiagnosed Diseases Network has been touted by the NIH as the most successful program in NIH Common Fund history. And despite the massive size of the undiagnosed community, which includes almost all of the rare disease community, the UDN is the only NIH program for the entire undiagnosed community, diagnosing all kinds of rare, genetic or not. So that's all we have. The UDN has a track record of scientific discovery, innovation, and excellence, but most critically for our patients and families, it has a track record and commitment to patient engagement and clinical integration, those next steps that we also desperately need, and most of all, collaboration. So the NIH Common Fund only lasts 10 years. And given the UDN's success, our patient community expected that the NIH would surely keep this going, to keep this phenomenal infrastructure and investment by Uncle Sam alive and well. Unfortunately for the UDN, it suffers the same issue that most undiagnosed patients do. It's become a sort of medical hot potato. Most of the NIH centers actually chose to stop funding the NIH. A few institutes did dig through their couch cushions and find enough funds to keep funding the coordinating center. But most of all the clinical sites, that funding has been cut. That's $15 million that was totally cut. And keep in mind, again, this is the only funding our community has. So this cut, unfortunately, impacts our underserved and undiagnosed patients most of all, because they're the ones that can't travel to get a diagnosis. They're the ones who need those clinical sites most of all. And fortunately, from everyone you've heard before us, it's not too late for fiscal year 2023, but since we're kind of cobbling this together last minute, we're begging for your help to help us save this critical program at the NIH. If you could help us provide letters of support, give us help if you know anybody in your communities who was actually diagnosed by the UDN, get their written testimony, help us find champions on Capitol Hill who might be compassionate or sympathetic to the plight of our patients and families, pediatric and adult. And really, help us find ways to utilize leadership on Capitol Hill, or connect us with the right committee staff, anything. Like, honestly, we're just here begging for some help, and hopefully I kept this under time, since I know we were running a little bit over.
Christina, thank you so much for sharing. We really appreciate it.
Thanks.
So we are now going to move to Lisa.
Hello, everyone. I'm really pleased to be here speaking, and I don't know if it was intentional or completely by accident, but in a way, some of what I'm going to be talking about really ties some of the strings that some of my former speakers on the panel have talked about. And I think what I'd like to present for the National Scleroderma Foundation is really a lesson in change and a lesson in pivoting, which is where we are right now. And I think some of the things that I will mention refer back to, I guess, some of the things that Ryan was talking about in terms of the various streams of funding, but also speak to what Christina just mentioned about what happens when you lose funding. And I think that very much defines where we are right now at the National Scleroderma Foundation, and how that has helped us to refine our strategy into the coming year. Next slide, please. What I wanted to do here was to give a little bit of a quick sense of the appropriations history that brought us as the National Scleroderma Foundation to where we are right now in appropriations strategies. For years, we were included in the PRMRP eligibility list. We're funded under the programs of the Department of Defense through the Defense Appropriations Act. And for years, scleroderma was listed on the PRMRP, which is the peer-reviewed medical research programs eligibility list, which meant that doctors who were doing research and researchers doing research in the area of scleroderma were eligible to apply for a relatively large pool of funds through the PRMRP, but those researchers were competing against other researchers in many other areas, and really had to stretch to get their research funded. So they were competing against cancer researchers and arthritis researchers, and researchers across a broad range of eligibility. Then for fiscal year 20, we were very fortunate to find one of those champions that I think Ryan had referred to. We found a champion in Representative Nita Lowey of New York, who was the chair of the House Appropriations Committee. And that is the exact kind of champion that you want to get. And she helped to guide a request of ours to getting named on the CDMRP, which was congressionally designated medical research programs. And that meant that for us in scleroderma, we had a designated pool of $5 million a year under which our researchers could compete against each other, but only scleroderma researchers for that pool of money each year. And we did get that money for fiscal year 20 and fiscal year 21. Then in a terrible twist of fate for us, Representative Lowey decided to retire. So she was no longer in Congress. She was no longer the chair of the Appropriations Committee, and we did not have that champion. So then last year in 2022, what we found was we were no longer getting the funds through the CDMRP. And once you're on the CDMRP, you're no longer on the PRMRP. So we had lost our place on the eligibility list there. So last year, in a very difficult funding or appropriations year, in talking to our leaders on the Hill, it was challenging in a lot of ways. We found that we had to argue for either or, depending on who we were speaking for, to either get back on the PRMRP or to get the CDMRP scleroderma program reinstated. And unfortunately, those were not successful for us. And this is where our experience taught us to be nimble, taught us to pivot. And this has really framed what our strategies are moving forward and what our goals are moving forward. The next slide, please. So this is what we're looking at this year. It is another very complicated year. In trying to find ourselves a new champion, or in trying to find people who will, people on the Hill who will sort of stand for us and really push for funding either through the CDMRP or for the PRMRP. We're facing a year of uncertainty in elections. We don't know what certainly the Hill is going to look like, and certainly don't know what appropriations committee is going to look like, who's actually going to be on those committees. We expect will change a lot, and certainly the leaders, the leads, the chairs on those committees is likely to change quite a bit. Additionally, there are a lot of retirements on the Hill that are expected coming up this year. Also, the federal budget process changes. I think there was talk before about how we know how the process is supposed to work, and I think Sheila was really good at mentioning that. We know how it's supposed to work, but then we're finding that we began to get used to how it did work outside of the usual process. This past year, what we learned was the federal budget process can be completely wonky, and you really do have to roll with the punches when it comes to that. On top of that, we're looking at a year where there are unpredictable big ticket items in the budget. It could be funding for more COVID relief or Ukraine relief or all kinds of things that will really change where priorities lie, and we're not really sure where. What this means for us is that we're really looking at a year where our funding for our area and certainly funding for research in scleroderma, and in our big picture area, funding for research and treatments in rare diseases can very much take a backseat and then a further backseat and then the further backseat. So we have to look at being able to approach our strategy in a way that really accommodates that. We're finding that we're expecting that this year, like last year, we may see a situation where we are in contact with our leaders on the Hill and people that we're used to speaking with and who are very much our supporters, who very suddenly get perhaps indications from leadership that they are no longer entertaining requests for any funding outside of what has existed in the past, and in some cases will not entertain requests for funding outside of the usual the amounts that go from year to year to year. So what it's meant for us is we're looking at a really big change for our goal and strategies for this year. For this year, for fiscal 2023, we're looking at really concentrating our efforts on getting back onto that PRMRP eligibility list. So we'll get to sort of the core of where we were to get ourselves back on in a list of eligible disease states where our researchers can compete against others. And at the same time, we're really beginning to play a little bit of a waiting game, but also be very strategic about finding ourselves that new champion, realizing that that's the way to go again. We can't always count on having year-to-year champions. We really need someone who's in it for the long haul for us. And that's the way we're looking at it. And I guess the lesson that I'd like to give up for my colleagues on the call is that you really do have to be nimble. You do have to consider big changes that are very much outside of your control, and then also be able to go from one strategy to the next and have a short-term strategy and also a long-term strategy. And that's where we are right now. And I can take any questions as well.
Lisa, thank you so much. It doesn't look like we have any questions right now, but definitely keep an eye on the chat. Some may come in there. Thank you. So last but not least, we have Rachel, and she is going to share some upcoming state advocacy events with you all.
Thank you, Caitlin. Yes, thank you for everyone speaking. I don't want to take too much of your time. I know we're already over, but I did want to mention our brand new event coming up in Boston, Massachusetts. This is our Rare Disease State Advocacy Day. This will be our first in-person event, and this event is going to be open to Massachusetts residents only. Registration is open. I'm going to go ahead and put the link to this registration in the chat box below. And if you have any questions, please feel free to email me. My email is listed below. This will be an in-person event on Thursday, June 9th once again in Boston, Massachusetts. It's going to be a little bit like a mini rare disease day, where we're going to have a day of action for Massachusetts residents to join together, meet their state legislators, and meet us all together in Boston. So hopefully we see some of our advocates there, and any questions, please feel free to reach out to me for this. And then one more thing, we are having a RDLA state advocacy webinar next Thursday, April 28th. I will also be putting the registration link in the chat box. So we're going to be discussing 1115 waivers with Bailey McGowan, who is our state policy manager. And then we're also doing a DUR PNT drug utilization review on their community Congress priorities with Lynn Wilson. And once again, if you have any questions or would like to suggest future topics for state advocacy webinars, please feel free to email me for this as well.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Rachel. And thank you all for hanging with us until the end. I know we went over just a little bit. I want to invite you all to join us again for our next monthly webinar. It will be on May 19th at the same time at noon. If you're interested in speaking or you want to hear more about a particular topic, email me and let me know. I encourage you all to keep in touch with us. Sign up for our newsletter on our website. You can fill out action alerts there to send letters directly to your members of Congress. These are all of our social media accounts, and I've included my email, Rachel's email, in case you have any questions about the state events, and then also Shannon's email there. If you have any questions for us, please feel free to reach out. And thank you to our April RDLA webinar sponsors. Thank you all for being with us.